Hi, my Facebook family, my hopeMORE Facebook family. Welcome to our Stoptober first series called Stop the Violence. And I put Stop the Violence, period. You know how young kids nowadays are like, stop it, period. Or they declare something and then they put a period behind it. What I love about it, that unlike an exclamation point that comes sort of out of surprise, unfortunately, we're dealing with scary things every day in our life. There's no longer a surprise. It can be sometimes very, very unnerving when it happens to us or downright devastating, but it's no longer a surprise because we know that all over the world, people are dealing with sexual violence in their family. And I'm sorry for that shaking. So, as normal, I'm asking you guys to come on, click, share, and like. We have a special guest today to talk about stopping sexual abuse and violence. So, I need you guys to really tune in, ask questions below, comment. Even if you're watching on the replay, we want to hear from you. So I know that typically I come on here and I'm smiling and I'm laughing and I'm talking and, dancing to music. Well, today is not that day. In fact, I need you guys to help me out. Are there some songs out there dealing with scary things that happen in people's lives? Not scary in love, like Lions and Tigers and Bears by Jasmine Sullivan, but about really hard things that are happening in this world. Really, really hard things that are happening. And tonight we're going to be talking about sexual violence. And I think about, especially in light of everything that's been happening in the media, and I'm asking you guys to share and like. So I'm going to share and like while I talk. You see so much coming out about whether it's R. Kelly or the author and hip hop celebrity mentor Polite, Harvey Weinstein, let's see who else, Woody Allen. You see so many things talking about sexual violence, but they're all coming from a different perspective. And I think for some people it can get really, really confusing. Like, is it sexually violent to be flirted with in the workplace, or your uncle, not your uncle, but someone's uncle sleeping with a 14-year-old neighbor getting her pregnant? Do they deserve prison? Let's see. Is it sexual violence if a man is messed with, or a young boy or a teenager, by an older woman or against their will? Can they be victims? So I think sometimes when people say stop violence, a lot of us may be sort of confused to what is violent, what it is sexual violence. Oh yeah, I'm talking. I can hear me. What is sexual violence? So we're going to talk about that today. And what can we do about sexual violence? Because, many times it feels so above us, so big, right? We got the celebrity scandals, we got the R. Kellys of the world, and all this kind of stuff. And people often think, well, like, what can I do about that? What can I do? Hope, are y'all gonna tell me what I can do about that? Well, we don't have all the answers, but we have some ideas. And I think you'll really, really enjoy this tonight's discussion. And when I say enjoy, you'll be enlightened, and hopefully you'll never need this information. But if you do need it because you know someone or a friend or someone's child you suspect is dealing with sexual violence, then maybe you have some go-tos, right? You have some things to think about. So what I wanted to do is bring on a special guest who is so nice to come on. She is a survivor. Can we say survivors? Yes, she is a survivor of sexual assault, and I'm gonna let her come on. She's so much more than that. She's a wonderful advocate as well as a strong, overall great person. So please, hopeMORE family, give my I feel you in the spirit. Come on, clap wherever you are, even on the replay, for our special guest, Michaela. Hi, Michaela.
Hey.
Thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you coming on. Would you mind just sharing with my hopeMORE family a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So my name is Michaela Fisher, and I am a sexual violence counselor for Refuge House for Madison and Jefferson counties. I just started this position in June of this year, so I'm still a little new. But like Hope said, I am a survivor of child sexual abuse, um, and a little bit more about me. I'm 23. In 2020, I graduated from Morehead State University in Morehead, Kentucky. I have a bachelor's in criminology and sociology and a minor in gender studies. This is my first position as a sexual violence advocate, but in the past, I have worked with juveniles, juvenile offenders in Kentucky. I've worked with adults. I've had a few different odd jobs, but yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Well, thank you so much. One of my favorite audience members, Chandrika, says hello. Thank you for welcoming my guest. Hi. Well, Michaela, listen, I called you, and you are just have been so gracious to come on to this discussion with me about stopping sexual violence. And I know that this show, I tell everyone, you need to get the link. You may need to share it to a group page, share it on your page, because hopefully you don't need the information today, but undoubtedly, because of the way the world is, everyone needs to be more aware of sexual violence. Don't you believe, Michaela?
Yeah, I actually wanted to share a statistic that I came across the other day. Um, it says that every 68 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted.
Every
And
68 seconds?
yeah,
Oh, wow.
and I think that's really powerful, because I think people don't realize how common sexual violence is, especially if it's never happened to them. The chances are of you knowing someone or being related to someone who's been assaulted is very high.
Wow. You know, Michaela, I was just at a training in July for critical response teams, which is this whole group that gets together and responds within, I think it is 48 hours to a death of a child, especially a child who's come in contact with DCF, Department of Children, Family, or Child Protective Services, and they investigate not the death itself, but what happened up to a year prior. And I guess they're trying to keep themselves accountable, because if they have a child who's come in contact with defects and all of a sudden they're dead, whether it's known the cause or not, it sort of makes the system say, wait a minute, did we not protect the children? Well, anyway, the speaker was talking about how, according to statistics, there are sexual offenders in this room. They may not have ever been caught, of course, not convicted if they're working with Department of Children and Families, but the idea I've heard before, and people like, maybe one out of every four if you're a Black person. I think the statistic a little bit higher if you're white. But you're like, okay, there's victims in this room, but the idea that, like, in any given church service, definitely sports event, school, there are offenders who are there. Now, whether they're offending at that moment or have offended in the past, like a drunken night where they've had sex with someone who did not have consent, they are statistically offenders everywhere, which makes the fact that you just said 68 every 68 seconds there's someone in the US being attacked sexually. That's amazing. I don't know, Michaela, if you keep up with this particular state, but I think a lot of people are very interested in Texas' new abortion law, where you can't have an abortion after 6 weeks, including in the cases of incest and rape, which for some of the most conservative pro-lifers, which I'm one, is typically some exception. And the governor said, oh, but we're going to make sure we get rid of the rapists in Texas. And I was horrified, because I was
Yeah,
like, do you understand that rapists are not boogeymen? You got some rapists right there in your cabinet, probably, or somewhere in your Senate and legislature. And he said it I think in a way to try to make people feel like, oh, we're going to eliminate this threat. But I'm just like, how are you going to get rid of all the rapists? It doesn't even work that way, sir.
Yeah, and I think something to think about with that is that only like 30% of sexual assaults are reported. So if the assault isn't even reported, then you don't even know who the perpetrator is. So,
Right.
how can you get rid of a perpetrator or put them in jail if you don't even know that they assaulted someone?
Right. Right. It's underreported. So how can you actually denote them? And, I was sharing with Michaela that, a lot of people have different opinions as to what sexual violence is. Well, if you're in the state of Florida, which a lot of my viewers are, I sort of truncated what the statute says. This is the kind of sexual violence that can be pursued criminally. Sexual battery, forcible sexual assault, attempted or committed, lewd or lascivious acts, sexual acts committed on, with, or in the presence of a person under 16 years of age. Now, that's Florida statute. However, and so that is what, the state legislature has deemed as not just a violent situation, but one in which someone could be penalized. But for the sake of this discussion, I'm very curious about your thoughts as to this definition, Michaela. Here, sexual violence is much more broadly discussed. Sexual violence is the use of sexual acts or words that are unwanted by and or are harmful to another person. Now, unlike the Florida statute I just talked about, this may be a harmful violation or hurtful violation of personal boundaries, but does not raise to the level of crime. And I think about in these cases like sexual harassment on the workplace, things that we heard about that made Harvey Weinstein have to go to jail, even though he was accused of out and out rape. But it's much more broad because it's not just about the violence we think about, like someone being thrown down and someone having their way with them with some intercourse or penetration, but sexual violence in this way is much more broad, and it understands that acts and words that are harmful can also be sexual violence. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so with me, the way that I view the term sexual violence, I kind of look at it as an umbrella term. So for me, when I hear sexual violence, I think of sexual assault, rape, sex trafficking, fondling, exposing yourself, um, even like it says, like just words, like talking to someone, threatening them, like just
Yes.
because doesn't someone doesn't physically threaten them or physically, especially physically force them to do something, you can psychologically force someone by coercing them. Um,
Yes.
so I just think all of those things to me kind of fall under sexual violence. And there's a lot more than what I just listed off, but that's just off the top of my head what I think
Yeah.
about it.
Well, here's the thing, right? We do know that whatever sexual violence is, there is a victim, there is harm. And one of the things that disgusted me so much about many people's response to the allegation of sexual violence of R. Kelly against women underage was that, oh, they're old enough to know better, or sexual assault in a harassment situation in a workplace, and they're like, oh, they're adults, they're old enough to know better. And I do have, now granted, when it comes to children and adults, I do have a different sense of um righteous anger. But in both of those situations, it does not mean that there was not harm done, especially when the power is very unequal. I think when it comes to kids, most people are like, oh, yeah, 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 I can understand. But it also, the whole concept of kids and teenage and puberty, we really realize that a lot of that is a really modern day concept. In the last maybe 130 years, have we given people of an age of puberty on some type of intermittent age group between adulthood, because back in the day, once you had a period, you can get married and have a baby. But now these same people we're saying needs to be protected. And so I just want everyone to understand that sexual violence is harmful, regardless if you think that little boy is mannish or that little girl is flirtatious, like they are being harmed. What do you think about people who sort of like undervalue, or they seem to not think is violent? Sexual violence is violent if it's a sexual interaction with a person underage.
So I don't think it matters what the age is. You can be any age and be a victim. Um, and I think that kids and teenagers, I think that people get more upset when kids and teenagers are assaulted or raped because it is the mindset of they're young, they haven't even like fully developed yet, like they don't know what they want, they can't say yes or no, but I think that people need to broaden the scope because when we look at adult survivors and victims, I think that people tend to put the blame more on the victim when they're older and say, well, how were they dressing? How were they acting? Were they drinking? Because I think they just think about their age and they're like, they know the difference between right and wrong. And they think that something like a sexual assault can be prevented.
Yeah.
But I think that it's not on the victim to prevent an assault. I think that it's on parents to teach their kids not to assault other people because something like that, I believe, is taught
Yeah.
and learned. And I think it's very important to talk to your kids. It makes me think about this saying, boys will be boys. And
Oh,
for me, I don't like that saying because it kind of leads to the impression that boys are like inherently aggressive and that boys are just going to do whatever they want to do. And kind of like the idea that they can't be taught and they're just going to do whatever they want to do. But it's boys are going to be whoever you teach them how to be.
that is such a good point. Boys are going to be however you teach them be, and same thing goes with girls. So I'm glad you clarified something actually. And the last time I did a talk on domestic violence, I was corrected. See, you're a great advocate in that it is not the victim who needs to stop the sexual violence, right? The person who is committing the violence need not to do it. But one way that we can help be allies, as well as maybe be smart about ways to escape a situation or help a friend escape a situation, is to be more educated at the very least. Listen, I think that's a great segue into some of these characters I put on the advertisement. Let me see what our people are saying. Yes, thank you, Chandria. It's learned sometimes from their environment. That is so true. You were saying, Michaela, that sometimes or many times the idea of what sexual violence is taught. And I was like, sometimes it is modeled, right? It may not be that father from the house saying go out there and force a girl to have sex with you, but it could come from the kind of media that you look at. Do you laugh at rape jokes? It could be, how do you respond in the case of, and this is my bully pulpit, so I'm gonna share it with, like, in the middle here to the lower to the right to the right, left of the screen, there's a picture of R. Kelly and the late Aaliyah, who was an R&B star. When she was underage, um, it came out in his trial that he was just convicted for 9 counts of different issues of sexual violence, to include child molestation. He married her, but he was having sex with her underage. She lied about her age to get married. And a lot of people, especially during that time, who there was rumors about it, they were like, oh, but she's grown enough. I mean, she has a song, age ain't nothing but a number. I don't know if that was a title or just a line, but the whole concept of like, who could have helped prevented the sexual violence? And this is not a blame game, okay? But we think about different things, like you said, parents. Andrea says, yes, everything starts at home. What is allowed, right? Let's take it off of what often we do think about as male and female, but your son wants to be a great football player, so you allow him to go anywhere where they claim there's a camp, but you don't know who's running the camp. You're not concerned with who's going to be the what is it called, the the guardian or the chaperone. You have no idea. And I think sometimes parents just sort of like, oh, we can fling the children out to the stars, especially if we think they're going to be really great or grand at something. But similar to someone being coached as a great singer like Aaliyah was, they also could be right there in the snare of a pedophile's hands. And because parents could want so much for their child to be famous, they may not see patterns of grooming or things that are happening. And I just think that it, in those cases, it's not it's never the victim's fault, but especially when it comes to children who are underage, it's not their fault, and we got to look at different things like, where were the parents? Yes, where were the parents? I think about that even in the Michael Jackson case. Once Michael Jackson was accused of molesting little boys, then years later, a mother's like, yeah, go over there and spend the night with Michael Jackson, sleep in his bed. I'm just like, were you trying to set up a situation? It's like,
yeah.
to R. Kelly, I'm just thinking, once you get a sniff that something's wrong, why would a parent set their child up for any opportunity to be with this person, even if they're not alone? It just is so upsetting to me.
Yeah, I agree. And specifically with the R. Kelly cases, I was reading articles, and they were talking about how, like, why did it take 3 decades to get justice for these survivors? Because he's had allegations put on him up until like the early 1990s. And one of the things that the article talked about was that the race of his victims played a big part in it. Because I don't want to say all of them were, because I'm not sure, but the majority of them were Black women and girls. And especially in the media, Black women and girls are portrayed as unreliable, liars, mischievous, and so a lot of people put the blame on them instead of the perpetrator. And was like, oh, it's their fault, like they tricked him and they're the ones that started it. And one of the articles even quoted Chance the Rapper as stating, I didn't value the accuser's stories because they were Black women.
Wow.
And I think that is so powerful and shows how racism is alive and well, even though people think that it isn't, and that just because it doesn't happen to them, that it's not there. And I think that's really important to point out, because especially with sexual violence, women and people in general of color are more likely to be sexually assaulted than white people.
That is so crazy. You are preaching, my sister. It is so sad to say that
Yeah.
these were young black girls, basically. And because they were young black girls, people were not, upset and running towards helping them. And there is a what is it called, adulterization, I think is the word, of black children, where black children are often treated and responded to, and even in the media sometimes referred to as young man, versus you'll have Tamir Rice, who I think was 12 years old, like black young man. And, in other circumstances, maybe that sounds great. Like, oh, you're a young lady. But then you have like a 23-year-old or 25-year-old white girl who's missed, and they're called white girl or youth. And so, like, when it comes to black children, especially black women, they're often made so much more adult, which alleviates the idea that they should know better, right? They should their response is something of their own making, and that's why people like R. Kelly lived, live. I think about there are exceptions to some of that stuff, but the truth of it is that is very much the case. You think about Jeffrey Epstein. Now he was convicted a long time ago, and well, several years ago in Florida for having sex with a 14-year-old. But because of his money and wealth, he was able to continue to do what he did, and then like to even now have the royal family of England implicated because money speaks. But think about how quickly he got that conviction, the very first one, versus like someone like R. Kelly, who actually did travel all over having a response, but he was able to get away with it. Yes, Chandria, money talks. There is racism and sexism. Racism is very much alive. And, I think about getting back to some of the people that I highlighted here, and I won't highlight all of them. I mentioned Jeffrey Epstein. There's a guy at the top. Some of you guys may not be movie buffs, but Woody Allen. That's a picture of Woody Allen and his adopted daughter, and he shared with Mia Farrow, an actress, years ago. And in 1992, I believe it was, she came out and said he molested me. In fact, he was suspected of molesting her in the 80s, I think, or late 70s, but his money and power was able to like sweep a lot of things under the rug. And, I think, and again, unlike R. Kelly, Mr. Allen has not gone to trial per se with the new allegations of his daughter, but we have this sense of not only does money talk, Chandria, but that we have people who are crying out saying, listen to me. And people are ignoring, or maybe a limitation is run. But when it comes to going back to your point about we teach our children, I'm sorry if this makes some of y'all mad out there, but I really do believe if you, we're not going to go down a rabbit hole, but if you support certain artists who have gotten away with and known for sexual assault, especially someone like R. Kelly, who wrote music about being with underage kids, like their art form was a promotion of this type of perversion. I think you're telling your children and those who are young around you that it's okay. As long as you're a musical genius, it's okay. And I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I can't go to a Woody Allen film because I'm like, he's gotten away with sexual assault. Chandrika asked, didn't he marry her? No, he married Mia's adopted Asian daughter that was like a daughter to him too. And it's believed that they began when she was underage. He married one of Mia's other children, and then this child they adopted together. And she says that he messed with her. So it's just really crazy. And this is just so hurtful. And I know even just depending on what you want to share, that you could definitely identify with the idea. As a child, you noted that you're a child survivor of sexual abuse, like how confusing it even is for even adult to come forward, because it's not always clear with a child as to what's gone on in their life.
Yeah. So for me, I was abused by my father, and for a really long time, I struggled with the fact of that. Are these flashbacks like real memories that I'm having, or are they like nightmares? Are they dreams? Because I would dream about it. And then um, I came out to my family as gay, and someone said to me, "Is this because of what your dad did to you?" And that, them saying that to me, made me realize that the flashbacks I was having were real. And that's also a misconception that if you are sexually abused, then that affects your sexual orientation, and that's a myth. So for anyone, if anyone is struggling with that thought, I just want to say that that is a myth, and studies have proven that your abuse does not equate your sexual orientation. But yeah, that was really hard for me to kind of come to realize that like it was real and the things I was remembering like were real. Um, so yeah, I just think that if you do know someone who's being abused or someone who was raped or anything like that, if they want to talk to you about it, I would say talk to them about it, because they might not have anyone that they can talk to. Um, and a lot of people think that talking about it will just make it worse. But I think talking about it helps people realize that they're not alone and that other people go through this too.
You know what? That is such a good point. And this is definitely one of those conversations that I'm hoping would really help equip people if they listen back to it, of things that they can do. And you're not just hearing it from some, you know, big expert. Michaela's gone through this, and I told her I came up with some do's and don'ts that I sort of like looked up and saw and sort of identified with, as well as maybe ways that you can intervene. I should probably say intervene, because listen, none of us can stop sexual violence. We don't have the power. And I want also people who may run into victims to be careful the language they use, because sometimes I could see that could, you know, be a sense of victim blaming, like why didn't you stop it? Well, we're going to talk about that. So I wanted to get, Michaela, your responses to some of my ideas about do's and don'ts of sexual assault responses when you're responding to a friend in particular who's telling you about sexual assault. I should say sexual assault disclosures. Let's start with don'ts, because there's really two. One, don't decide what is best for them. I love it, the fact that Chandrika chimed in. She was like, yeah, you know, speaking to someone is therapeutic, you know. So it, many times, I know I've been overwhelmed. I've had disclosures, not just in my professional life, but in my personal life. And I'm like, oh my God, what to do? Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. But it's not your job to decide what is best for them. Now, really understand, I'm talking about adults. I'm talking about people of age of consent, okay? Because it is a little different when you're dealing with children, but you don't have to decide what's best for them. And I think that's very important, because without knowing it, it could come off judgmental. You need to report that to the police, and you need to do that, you need to do that, you need to do this. Another don't, which I just note, is don't pass judgment or cast doubt on their story. This is so important. And I say this as a defense attorney who my whole job when I worked in criminal defense solely was to cast doubt on the story. But if someone's coming to you to disclose that they've been assaulted, most likely they trust you. You know, you may not even be a friend. Maybe you're a coworker. You stand out to them as someone they can trust. You should be the last to say, I don't believe you. If it turned out to not be true, there's still something wrong, right? So that person still needs help. But why don't you lean on the side of error, and just, on the potential of wrong, and just believe and show them that you're not passing judgment. And I think that's really, really hard because we intuitively, especially if it's someone you know or love, we intuitively want to be defensive at times. But I would say if that person came to you to disclose, you don't be that person. Let the police do it, right? Let the forensic scientists do it. What do you think about those two don'ts? Don't decide what is best for them, and and don't pass judgment or cast doubt on their story. Are those two good don'ts?
Yeah. So with the first one, something I wanted to point out is um when someone is sexually assaulted, their bodily autonomy is taken from them. They don't
Mm,
have they lost that control over their body and their right to decide what happens to them in their body. So when someone comes to you and tells you that they've been assaulted and you want to do everything to support them in whatever decision they make,
right.
because you trying to decide what to do for them is again taking their autonomy away. They need to be able to make their own decisions because something horrible just happened to them and they weren't able to say no. They weren't able to stop it. So they need to be given all the control over their body and their mind that they can be given. So you deciding what to do for them is not going to help them. It's going to make the situation worse. So I would say always be supportive of their decisions, whatever they are, even if you don't agree with them. It's their decision to make about their body and themselves. And as far as the second one, um, not only, especially as an advocate, um, we're taught that, you know, you should never not believe the survivor because that is basically what the rest of society does. They
Mm,
cast doubt on them and they blame them, they victim blame and say, oh, well, did you make a pass at them? Were you showing too much skin? Were you drinking? Like, what was the situation? Maybe it gave them a right to do what they did to you. And that's not okay. That's not okay to have that mindset, especially directly to someone who just went through an assault. Um, and I think the first few moments where the survivor interacts with someone and tells them, know that like them telling you takes a lot. And for
yes.
them to tell you means that they trust you. And if you were to think that they're lying or tell them that you doubt them, that would hurt them so much more than you can imagine. So, yeah, I think those are really two good things to not do.
And I guess this next one is actually, you just introduced it perfectly. Do let them know that they are believed and supported. What you just said, let them know they're coming to you, they trust you. So don't drop the ball. Like, this is probably the easiest of some of the do's and don'ts. Just Believe them and tell them that you support them. That doesn't mean anything more than probably giving a listening ear without a lot of interrogation, because it's taking so much for them to go forward. This one step, do ask what they need. I love this when I saw it in an article, especially we're talking about adults, right? And maybe they've never been asked. Like Michaela just said, people who are sexually assaulted, they lose autonomy over their body. We are trying to empower them, right? So part of this is also saying, what do you need? Because everyone's response is not necessarily, especially certain communities, their safety response or how they want to respond may be not at all running to the police. You know, they could need to, I don't know, just talk. Can they talk because they can't find anyone to talk to? Can you think of, Michaela, other needs that some people may have when they first disclose that they've been sexually assaulted?
Um, I would also say, like, let them guide the conversation, because
Mm,
you don't want to make them talk about or do something that they don't want to do. So, exactly what this says, do ask what they need. Ask them. Say, do you need me to just listen? Like, do you want to talk about what happened? Um, do you want to go get something to eat? You know, are you tired? Do you need to take a nap? Um,
that's so good.
Things like that. It doesn't have to be, oh, well, do you want to go to the police? Or do you just want to keep this a secret? Like, just let them tell you what they need. They might want to go see a family member or a best friend. They may need that support right now. They may want to go do something fun, like go on a hike or like something they enjoy. You know, you don't know what someone needs unless they tell you. And don't ever make the decision for them.
I Those are so good, Michaela. I remember, and I don't know that it was direct related to sexual assault, but I believe it was domestic violence of some sort. Some story that was told in training, one of the trainings, and it probably was the same one that you've probably been to, where this woman who had all these apparent needs from the advocate's point of view, she was like, "Well, I just need a washer and dryer. I need a washer and dryer." And the advocate was getting so upset because that's not necessarily in the list of services. And you may be a friend and they're like, oh, what I need is this. And it seems so not attached. But she was wanting a washer and dryer because there was something about having to leave home that made her less safe. And having a washer and dryer would change, it was added to something else. And that made her feel much more comfortable to seek help. So I love that, because sometimes what people need, not just a listening ear, but like you said, maybe they're just tired. Could you imagine? And I know you can, but to my audience, the trauma that you go through, sometimes you're not able to sleep. I love that. We have a few more, but it's all sort of encompassing. Now, this can be dicey because we've just told you to ask them what they need, right? And don't decide for them. But it is okay for you to say, you know what? If you're ready, or when you're ready, or like there's this, like I would suggest everyone write down these numbers I'm about to put up. There's hotlines. There's a national assault hotline, Refuge House in Taylor County and Jefferson and Madison. We have numbers that we're going to give you here. The national hotline is this number. Like, hey, you want to get help? Encourage them to get help or to seek help. Not so much that you're crazy or anything like that, but just the idea. Down below is Refuge House in Taylor County, where I live. And then that toll-free number, if you're in Jefferson, Madison, Leon, there's like 8 counties, I think, Refuge House is in, then you can also get help there. But sometimes people are afraid because they think anytime you reach out, that's triggering the police or triggering Department of Children and Family, right? And now I'm still talking about adults, okay? I'm still talking about adults who share, but that there's nothing wrong with encouraging them to get help. Now, you are encouraging them. You're not telling them, and you're not, every time you see them, did you get help? Did you get help? And this is very important because even dealing with something I was dealing with recently. I was sort of avoiding a friend who had very good advice, but I hadn't followed up on it. And it was something for my good, but all of us have had situations where, someone's like, you should do this, and you're like, ooh, I don't want to talk to them because I haven't done it yet. You don't want to make your friend feel like now they're accountable to you personally about the decisions they make for their body.
Yeah, there's a difference between making someone get help, like saying, okay, get your stuff, we're going to go to the hospital right now.
Yes, and
Like,
have a sexual assault kit. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's a no. Like, you don't want to do that. But like it said, like encouraging them, like letting them know, like, hey, like I saw that there's this phone number you can call if you want to, like whenever you're ready, and if it would make you feel better, like I can be there with you, like when you make that call. That's just letting them know that there's a resource there for them if they choose that they want it.
I
So
love it.
yeah,
That,
so
that
there's a
is so
difference.
important. It is a difference. Chandrika, my super, super fan, she said, give them time to share more whenever they're ready. That's true. They may not in one sitting. I dare say that no one is in one sitting ready to just share everything. And also understand, and that's going to be a point later, that you're not their therapist as well. So it's a hard thing to balance, but they're sharing with you. You're going to encourage them, ask them what they need, and encourage them to seek help, but asking what they need may come and look differently. And thank you, Chandrika, for sharing. She said as a married woman, she was molested at 7, and she has to remind herself from time to time that it's okay for her husband to caress her. That may be what she needs, or a person needs, like a hug. Thank you, Chandrika, for sharing that. I'm so sorry to hear that. I saw that you said me too. It is so important, and even in seeking help, that help for some people may have very little to do with clinical therapy, right? It could be like, in a case like a married woman, I do have there have been situations, and I'm sure it is not unusual, where you would have someone who doesn't want to share it with their parents, and they're an adult. They don't want to share with their husband. And that maybe encouraging them to seek help is encouraging you to get with your team, right? Your husband or your spouse or significant other, they should be down with you for whatever. You're not by yourself. Number 6, do continue to be a support long after the bruises are fade. And sexual assault, sometimes there's no bruises. But you understand, after sort of like the newness of the assault, or maybe the newness of the pain of the disclosure, if you can continue to be a support, and that support may look different. It may not be you calling them every week. They may not want you to call them every week. Ask them what they want. But for them to at least look to you with the same confidence that they came to you in the first place to share and be that support. And I'm gonna have you, review both of these points. And number 7, do take care of yourself. This is what I was referring to earlier, that sometimes you can take on the pain of someone else's trauma, and you yourself have unanswered trauma, or you've had therapy, you're good, you're even a sexual advocate, Michaela, and you yourself you're a survivor of child sexual abuse. That it's important that you, who's been disclosed to, still take care of yourself, because you're hearing all this stuff and it could be triggering to you, and you're like all of a sudden feeling depressed and anxious because it's opened up something in you that's triggering. So it's okay to sort of like limit your support. Your support does not have to be you turn into their personal comfort animal, or their personal amateur psychologist, or that you're a professional advocate now, like you are, Michaela. And so could you speak to those two things, how ways you can continue to support after the bruises fade, or after the newness of the disclosure, as well as it's important for the person hearing it to take care of themselves as well?
Yeah, so I don't, even though I am a survivor, I don't speak for all survivors. I only speak for myself. So, from my experience, like my abuse happened like over 17 years ago. And
Mm.
like still today still affects me. And I think that if I didn't have my friends and family support, even to this day, that it would be like a different story for me. Like my life would be totally different if I didn't have the support that I do today. And, it doesn't have to be to where you like constantly bring up the assault and be like, hey, like, you remember that thing that happened? Like, are
Oh,
you okay?
that's the
It
worst.
it can be like you can text someone and just be like, hey, I was thinking about you today. Just wanted to see how you were, you know?
That's
Or
big.
like sending them a card, or like with thoughtful like thoughtful words, or just encouraging words. So you don't have to necessarily bring up the assault to let your friend know that you're there for them. There are multiple ways to do that. Um, and just know that like the trauma from their assault isn't just going to go away after a few days or a few months or a year. Like, it's going to stick with them for a long time. So yeah, there's little things you can do to just like check in, or like take them out to lunch one day and like catch up with each other, things like that. um and then for number 7, um to take care of yourself. There have been times before my position as an advocate, um when I was in high school, I used to call myself like the city therapist because all of my high school friends would come to me for advice. I don't know why, but they would always come to me with their problems and like ask me for advice. And even still to this day, like, people come to me, and which is fine. I'm a great listener. I love talking to people. I'm always going to be there for people. But there are situations where I've had to say, I want you to know that I'm here for you, and I'm always going to be here for you whenever you need to talk. Um, but have you ever considered going to a counselor or a therapist? Because I think that they can help you on a different level than I can. And I think that being able to be there for your friends is important, but also being able to set a boundary with yourself and your friends and saying, like, I am here for you,
Yeah.
but like with this specific thing, I feel like this person could help you a lot more than I can help you. Or also, like, I go to therapy and I'm a counselor, but it doesn't mean that I can't go to therapy. Like, and I'm a big advocate for therapy because I think that doesn't matter who you are, what you've been through, just there's nothing like sitting there talking to a stranger and just being able to tell them anything.
And there's
And
no, yeah, I love, yeah,
yeah,
I totally
but
understand.
if talking isn't your thing, if therapy isn't it's not for everyone. There are so many things you can do. You could meditate, you could pick up hobbies, things you like to do. Like, for me, I love hiking, I love kayaking, I love going to the beach. The beach is my favorite place. Whenever I need to like regroup and just have some me time, like, I go to the beach. Um, so self-care doesn't always have to be therapy. It can be whatever you want it to be, whatever you need. But just having those outlets for yourself to like recharge and regroup is super important, and having boundaries with your
Yes.
friends and your family. Because just because they're your family doesn't mean that you can't have boundaries. And you're never too old to make a boundary. It doesn't matter. I think boundaries are very important for self care, because being able to say no or decline an invitation or just little things like that, that has helped me a lot with like my self care. And it took me a long time to realize that like self care isn't selfish, because I
Yes.
always thought that saying no to someone or just not wanting to hang out one night like made me selfish, because I just didn't want to do it. Like I just didn't want to. But it's what I needed in that moment, and you just have to realize that it's not selfish. Like it's okay to take care of yourself and do what you need to do for yourself.
I love it. I love it, especially you saying sometimes you just don't want to do it. I am definitely the type that if there's a space in my calendar and someone asks me, it's hard for me to say no because I'm like, why? It's right there. But you need margin in your life. Everybody, you need margin in your life. And so sometimes you need just not to do anything. And it's okay to say that. Oh man, our time is like winding up. But I have this is like really, really good. And oh my gosh, your insight, Michaela, you're so young, but you have like so much wisdom. And I know some of that was born from pain as well. But I think it is important, especially empaths, right? To be okay with saying, you know what? Like you said, this, you may do well to go to someone who can help you on this level, or okay, at this time I'm not really good with that. I myself experienced sexual abuse as a kid, and it's really interesting because I know that I don't often identify, like, because in my mind it's probably a coping mechanism, but like I'll literally watch something and I'll never think about me. Like, and I don't mean this in a selfless way, but like, I don't know. I think it's strange. It's almost like being black and then you see black people but don't identify. So I don't identify as a survivor, but I know that I am, right? And so I was taking on these child molestation cases and sexual assault cases, and I ended up having to go to counseling and deal with my own child assault issues. And I had to tell my boss, like, I can't do any more of those cases right now. And I didn't do any of those cases again, at least into trial, because I was like, that's triggering. And it's okay to decide that. Now, as we close, and I have way more information than we have time. And I thank you for being so patient. We may go a little bit over an hour. Hope you don't mind. But and I probably could have started off with either list of the do's and don'ts of sexual assault that we just gone over, or this next list. And this list. Oh, before I go to any more lists, I just wanted to note. Now, the responses we've just been talking about, do's and don'ts, those are really for adults, adult friends who disclose. If that's not the responses of sexual violence to a child. Here in Florida, everyone is a mandatory reporter. And I realize people watch from all different places, but you must report. And who do you report to? And you tell me if I'm right, sexual violence advocate, to your local child protective services or Department of Children Family, or the police. Those are the two agencies that you can report to. And of course, if you are a special mandatory reporter like a teacher, health professional, you definitely can lose your license and stuff over not reporting. So the do's and don'ts we were just talking about, like letting them decide. If it's a child, you can't let them decide, okay?
Yeah.
And I know it's easier said than done, and I would probably spend too long to go over. Sometimes I'm like, you know what, this is why I don't want to babysit people's children, because I don't want to see stuff and then be worried, like, is that abuse? What's happening? But yeah, that responses we were just doing, that wasn't related to children. You must report. And if you need help in reporting, I think unless it's your profession, like as an attorney, I think I have to give my name and number. But I believe you can also report, you know what, look up the laws in your individual district. Because I was just in a meeting and they were asking that question, and it was a varied belief. They're like, well, if you're a teacher, blah 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 blah, certain kind of people you have to give your name and number, but in certain aspects you don't. But either way, don't be afraid of reporting, because hopefully if it's not true, that's going to come out. And if there is something there, you may have just not may you've just helped a child escape trauma. And I know it's easier said than done, but yes, understand those do's and don'ts do not apply to your responding to a child, right? Because I know one of the things that hurt you, Michaela, when we were talking is that, here you are in high school coming out as a lesbian, and someone then recognizes that they knew all along that you had been abused. And that had to be so discouraging. Like, if you knew I was being abused, why didn't you say anything? You're only concerned now that I'm saying I'm gay. And I just hate that, unfortunately, I hate that that happened. But I'm so grateful that you have made it your life's work at this time to help other people. Chandrika Bernard, she wanted to give you a shout out. She's so grateful that you have a strong support system, and she admires you for sharing. And
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I applaud. Because many times we do hear, as Chandrika says, what happens in this house stays in this house, and that's why some people never share or change. And Chandrika she mentors a lot of young women too, and she's has such an amazing spirit that is often like, I have to remind myself, yeah, she's been through some things, and so she knows how important it is to share. So thank you, Michaela, for being on here to share. So I'm gonna move on to I'm calling it 7 ways to stop sexual violence, and I'm using it as stop very broadly. It's, a lot of it is more so prevention or maybe thoughts, because I think awareness is so important. The more aware people are of certain things, the more they can intervene. So understand, this is not on the victim, okay? None of this list has take take martial arts, okay? This is just the idea of individually, how can we aid and impact to the stopping of sexual violence events where it's possible, because often it isn't, but where there is, here are some ideas. And what I'm going to do, just for the sake of time, I want to go through my 7 ways, and then I'm going to come back through and ask Michaela, the true expert, to talk about it. Okay, so educate yourself about consent. A lot of people have no idea. Well, I guess it's impossible for me to do all 7 and then come back, but a lot of people have no idea about the different factors that can go into consent. One is soberness. If a person is intoxicated, they cannot consent sexually. And different states have different leanings towards that. But if you're like, oh, we're going to get lit and then get busy, understand you can be not just committing a sexual or going against someone's sexual boundaries, but you now are participating in sexual violence. I don't care how much they seem to enjoy it. And that's really important. Everyone heard about the drunk girl who that preppy guy had sex with, and he was given only a few months in jail or something because he was too pretty or privileged to go to prison. Like, she was intoxicated. And so it's very important that you educate yourself about consent. And if you're educating yourself, that's like also the people attached to you, your children, particularly boys, to let them know, get an enthusiastic yes. Let it not be any question that you have consent sexually when you're dealing with another person. What do you think?
And sorry.
No, go ahead.
So there's a couple things that I want to say. I think I'm very passionate about education, as we've talked about earlier. And I just want to say something to like make you think about how deep the idea of consent can how where the root of the idea of consent, like how young it affects people. So me and Hope were talking about this earlier, but just a simple thing like I use my nephew for example. If I've seen people try to force my nephew, he's 3, to like give him a kiss goodbye or give him a hug goodbye or force him to say I love you. And things like that can be really dangerous to teach this 3-year-old kid, and for him to experience like, okay, someone is trying to like bribe me into doing something. And that's not what consent is. Consent is about freely being able to tell someone yes, freely, without coercion, without physical force, without psychological force, anything, being able to say yes. So the idea of like bribing a kid to give you a kiss bye or to say I love you, that's taking their again their bodily autonomy away by trying to bribe them into giving you consent. And so just little things like that I think a lot of people don't realize that we teach our kids without even realize that we're
Right.
teaching them like something like that about consent, a shrewd version of consent. So I would just encourage people to educate themselves on consent and how they can teach their kids. It doesn't matter how young they are because they do understand and they will grow up remembering what you taught them and what they see. Um, and something else is that even if you give your consent and you say yes, you can change your mind at any time. You're allowed to change your
That's
mind.
good. That's good.
And so consent can be given, and then you can take that consent away. You can say yes, and then if you get uncomfortable, you can say no.
That's rich.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to remember that men and boys can be victims too, that it's not just women and young girls. Um, so I think that's important to keep in mind. I think that the statistic is like 1 in 6 American women will experience sexual violence, and 1 in 33 American men, will experience it.
Wow.
So,
Man, you just yes, Shandrika, consent isn't manipulation or convincing. Now, that is so true. I mean, how many times have, unfortunately, especially in the work we've done, Michaela, where people are even confused as if they've been assaulted because they didn't say no, but they didn't want it. Whether it's a young lady I dealt with recently, and she like someone a friend, supposedly a friend, came on to her and like laid on top of her, and she turned around, they started kissing, and then all of a sudden he's pulling down her pants and like in a split second, she's engaged sexually and never have been engaged sexually with this person before or anybody. She's a virgin. And like she's going through trauma of a sexual assault. She's going through trauma of a sexual assault. I think she is the age of consent in that state. So they literally, she's having anxiety attacks and all this kind of stuff because she did not give consent. So I think it's very important what you just noted. Not only can you give consent, like your consent or your maybe nonverbal consent in enjoying a kiss with someone is not the same as consenting for them to put their hands down your pants. Or you could have been like, yeah, I'm with it, but like, no, I don't want it. I don't care what that guy says. Oh, you gonna leave me like this and blue balls. It doesn't matter. consent is continuous as well as it's not manipulation or control. And thank you for sharing that. And also, yeah, just because a man potentially, when it comes to say intercourse, and we know sexual violence doesn't have to be intercourse, because his body may respond, or because it's more sort of like folklore seductive to be like, oh, a guy who's get turned on by an older woman or being held by a woman, it is still very possible for a boy to be victimized. And unfortunately, many times they're the least to share, because then that has all these other implications. Yes, consent is continuous, and that's important, not just for the potential, all of us, right? The person who may not think about it, and the person, or not the person who think about it, the person may find themselves feeling guilty because they don't want to go forward anymore. All they want to do is make out, or maybe like rub up on each other. They never wanted to have intercourse, but now they feel like they're guilty because they were consenting. No, you do not have to continue to consent. And that's really, really important. It's very, very important. Actually, I was like, "Ooh, Lord." I mean, that is some good stuff, because that's important. Think critically about how the media depicts sexuality. Now, I had mentioned in my description of today's show a concept that actually Michaela brought to mind about rape culture, and I put a little definition on here. Rape culture is basically a society or environment whose prevailing social attitudes have the effect of normalizing or trivializing sexual assault and abuse. And I was just like, oh my goodness, when I saw this point, I was like, yes, think critically about how the media depict sexuality. Do we depict our young, we mentioned about this disparity between young Black women. Do we often depict young Black women, even teenage Black women, as unwholesome sexual, savages? We even have a song, Savage. But you know what I mean? What is media telling us? No, literally, you're Gossip Girl and you're in high school talking about having sexual partners. What is media telling us about sexuality, and how does that translate to our children? I made mention of rape culture in particular because there are some prevailing social attitudes that affect us, trivializing sexual assault. I mean, you don't have to go back to Gone with the Wind, but there's scene where, he the wife is basically pushed back in the bedroom, and her husband has his way with her, and then she comes out all docile and in love. Like, that's not really thought of as rape. But it's even like our music. What is our music telling our young people about sexuality? Like, oh, you may be young but you're ready. That's still old school. Or I don't know, and I hate to sound old, but we have so many songs that are sexually violent. Put it up this and do it in her mouth. And da-da-da-da. We even have TikTok songs that when you listen to the lyrics, I'm like, did he just say put his what in her mouth? What? Like, not that oral sex hit my heart, but it's like, what are we telling our children about their own autonomy in their body and their sexuality? When we have to think critically, what are we buying into rape culture, or we're going against it? And not that sexuality is equally rape culture, but so much of our media depicts it. And I don't even like a lot of high school romance shows because they're showing sexually engaged teenagers in a romantic way, but I'm sitting there thinking, how old are they? Okay, a crime is happening. A crime is happening right now, and we're applauding this. What is that telling the next 14-year-old or 15-year-old who's feeling pressure to have sex with, some boy at a dance because they're getting all this media that depicts that they should be sexually expressive and open right now to these type of things? What are your thoughts on that?
So some of the things you said made my mind go back to a sociology class that I took in college. And something we focused on a lot was, again, educating children and the importance of parents talking to their kids about sex. And what happens when, especially today, where almost every kid I see has a phone or an iPad or an Xbox, video games. So if a kid isn't getting information from their parents, they're going to go to the internet. And a lot of kids, they could type in something in YouTube like Spider-Man, and there's been studies where it's like kids on YouTube start out with looking up simple things like Spider-Man or Coco Melon or like, anything.
Right.
And it sucks them into this I guess like a tunnel that leads to the porn industry. And there was a story about how a kid was looking up like just TV shows, stuff like that. And then like boobs popped up and like porn ads popped up. And of course a kid is going to click on that. And something that's very prominent in the porn industry is rape culture. And a lot of the rape culture in the porn industry is committed by Black men.
Wow.
And especially like gang banging and stuff. It's all Black men. And that is a distorted idea because over 50% of perpetrators of sexual assault are white. And but people equate race with the perpetrators because of the stuff like the porn, social media, commercials,
Wow.
ads, video games, stuff like that. And so and another thing is like the male gaze. Like that's all in social media and commercials especially. And music videos is a big one too. Because a lot of people watch music videos, especially kids. And in music videos, you always see like a Black man with like drugs, alcohol, a gun, women, and barely any clothes. The men like pouring liquor on women and just like always like blown up images of like certain areas of the female's body. Like that's all the male gaze. It's geared toward what society thinks men want to see. And
Wow.
something else that we talked about a lot in class was all of like these cuss words. And I'm not going to say them because I want to keep it clean, but these cuss words and like derogative names that we call people have everything to do with women in their bodies. Like, I can guarantee you, like, the C word, the D word, like,
The MF word.
yeah, the W word, like, all of those things have to do with the female or the female body. And so you
Wow.
are calling people names as an insult, and those insults that you're calling them are related to the female body. And it's like, why are you insulting someone by calling them something that has to do with a female? So it's like, again, putting the idea in your head that females are derogatory and like, sorry, I don't know how to explain what I'm trying to
No,
say.
no. I mean, it basically that it almost goes into one of the things like we are in and of ourselves as women sort of like to blame for the male's inability to like keep themselves. Chandrika says we are sex objects.
Yeah.
We're not necessarily being treasured in these videos. We're just an object of this person's drug use, money, fame. And if you objectify people, you could take and remove their humanity. Therefore, if you disrespect them, it's a liable, just like if I have a shoe, right? I shouldn't disrespect my shoe, but it's just a shoe. Oh, she just a hoe. She just a this. She just a that, you know? Shandrika mentioned how she has to censor her YouTube, our kids watching YouTube, and that's so sad, but it is so true. I have a friend of mine who loves to let her daughter hold her cell phone because she likes to listen to worship music at night. I absolutely hate it because I'm like, once that child has the phone in the bed, who knows? I mean, I believe at 11, 12, she may be doing that. But I know how I was at 11 and 12 going into a hotel and having access to a porn site and being curious. So I don't blame the fact that we have to like be more open, that we may not be able to control everything our children sees, but we need to critically look at the media and access. And sexuality is like a fad, there's a lot of peer pressure out there. And I'm looking at the time, I have to teach Bible study in a few minutes, but this is so good. This is so good. So I am going to sort of go down my list of 7 just for those who don't. Hey, oh, this is Sandria Colson. You know what, Sandria and Sandrika and Sandria. I love it. Um, Curiosity kills the cat and kids. Yes, it does. So, okay, so where are we? We're on 6. So, oh man, these are all such good ones. So we've talked about thinking critically about how the media depicts sexuality. Another way of stopping sexual violence, and I'm just going to buzz through this and then like have an overall discussion. Challenge sexual harassment at work, school, church. Have a sexual tolerance. I say work, school, church because that's where we're often interactive and sometimes feel the most comfortable. And it's a shame to say that you have to challenge it, but like, no, that's not cute. Don't make that sexual joke. Don't look at me all crazy. Like to have a way that you have zero tolerance for sexual harassment. And again, we'll circle back. D, don't laugh about rape and sexual assault. And, some of you guys out there, especially, I forgot his name. He's a comic. I know comedians make a lot of jokes about a lot of stuff, but I'm like, I think one way we can stop this rape culture is stop making fun of it. Stop victim blaming. And we've sort of talked a little bit about that throughout tonight. Be aware of grooming. And grooming, for those of you who may not have heard that concept before, is many times, the perpetrators of sexual violence, they don't just start like a boogeyman. They get close to a parent or a guardian. And then I'm often thinking about grooming in children, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be offering people money, protection, relationship as a way to get close to then violate them. So be aware of it. So sometimes that also, like we were talking about with Michaela's nephew, like stop making children hug Uncle so-and-so and kiss him. Uncle so-and-so is probably not a predator, but who knows? That same sense of obligation a child has to an adult to touch them when they don't want to may go to hurt them when it's someone else who has no good intention. So some of those things are grooming. G, intervene as an active bystander. There's an acronym called CARE, and I'm going to go over that. But here's some ways that can look. Giving someone a safe ride home from a party. You see some woman in particular is drunk and looked like her friends left her or whatever, and you see what looks like an opportunist taking advantage, like, oh, I'll drive you home, sweetie. Why don't you, like, you know what, that's okay, I'll drive her home. Or they're walking into a car. Be nosy. Get active and walk with them. It doesn't mean that person's going to hurt them, but think of the kind of ways we can actually intervene before something happens that someone could be vulnerable. Another idea is diverting a person who is engaged in uncomfortable behavior. You see that someone is coming on strong to your coworker. Hey girl, you want to go to the bathroom? Don't leave that person just alone and alienated. And I think that's something definitely that all of us can do. But sometimes we feel like, oh, it's not my business, or she grown, or whatever. Because typically in those situations, if you intervene and the person don't want you to, they'll let you know pretty quickly, like, that's okay, sweetie. And care is create a distraction, ask directly, rally others, and extend support. I probably should have put this at the beginning of our show, but create a distraction, exactly like I was sharing in that example. Someone is coming on strong to someone else, like, hey, girl, or knock over a water. I've heard so many ideas about this concept, create a distraction, so that you can get that person away from who looks like away from the vulnerable situation. Ask directly, hey, do you need help? Are you okay? And wait for their response. And if they're looking like they need help, and again, we're not saying you to be the police, rally others like, hey, you know what? She looks like, she needs some help. Can you help me go over there and maybe walk her to her car and extend support? None of this says act like law enforcement and put a gun on someone's. And I'll put these on the pages again, but those are 7 ways to stop sexual violence. And I know I had to go a little bit fast because I was looking at the time. But what out of any of those points would you like to share about regarding like ways to stop? I know I said a lot, but any of those ways you think, especially as a work, not only as a victim, as a survivor of sexual abuse, but now that you work with people who deal with sexual abuse, any of those ways sort of stand out that you want to comment on?
So yeah, I think the one about victim blaming is super important. We touched on it a little bit, but victim blaming leads to shame, and shame is such a powerful thing, especially for survivors or
Mm.
anyone who has experienced something traumatic. Um, and there's a book called Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, and
Ah,
it talks a lot about vulnerability and shame. And I just wanted to like give that book a shout out because that helped me a lot on like my journey of like feeling shame and just like letting go of that shame. Um, so I think that's super important. Um, And something else I wanted to touch on is that your sexual history, meaning like the people you've slept with, like if you've slept with people, if you haven't slept with people, like before you were assaulted, that doesn't matter.
mm,
It doesn't give anyone a right to take advantage of you sexually, even if you like do like sleeping with a lot of people. Like that doesn't matter. And I've heard a lot of people talk about that specifically because they're like, well, this person like sleeps around a lot. So can she really be raped? Can she really be sexually assaulted because she gives her consent all the time? Like that doesn't
wow.
matter. So I think
And we
that's
do do
something,
that.
yeah, important to think about. And like you touched on, just like if you see something happening, intervening, it can be as simple as, like one time I was at a frat party in college and me and my friend saw this couple like arguing and like they were screaming at each other and it looked like it was about to get physical. So we went over there and we were like, hey, like just wanted to make sure y'all were okay. And turns out like the situation was not okay. And she said she was okay. And then we were like, okay. And we turned around. And as soon as we turned around, the guy like punched her in the face. And so luckily we were standing right there because we were able to like surround her and make sure she was okay. And we ended up like driving her back to her house because she didn't have a ride. And so it's like you never know. It's not going to hurt anyone for you to go up to someone and just be like, hey, are you okay? The worst thing they can say is, yeah, I'm fine. Like, why would you ask that? But at least you ask them if they were okay. It's better to be safe than sorry, especially in situations where like people are out drinking and like you said, like someone could be walking alone to their vehicle, just like walking with the person to their vehicle, like that can help them like stay safe in that moment. Because um, drinking, people who are incapacitated are likely to be assaulted. And if someone is incapacitated in any way, whether it's drug, alcohol, whatever, they cannot consent legally. And a student of a teacher cannot consent, and an inmate in a prison cannot
Cannot
consent
consent. Come on
legally.
now.
So I just want everyone to know that.
No, that's important. That is important. Believe it or not, without getting all deep, I know of a legal professional, not personal friends, but I know of a legal professional who's on probation for some misdemeanor, and the probationer is like trying to hit on her and take her out. I'm like, honey, that's like a correctional officer flirting with the prisoner. You cannot get involved with that. But that is very important. So consent is also going back to that point about understanding consent. Consent is not always whether or not a person tells you yes. It's whether also if that person is considered to be free enough to say yes. And if you're incarcerated, if you're a student, even if you're horny, you are not in a position to, you are not, your, the power level is so imbalanced that your yeses also is not considered the requisite consent. Those are, man, I need a part two of this. Thank you so much. No, because it's just so much, you know, people, you know, I was inspired to in Stoptober to do shows about things that bump in the night, you know, things that people, you know, during this Halloween season, people like love to be scared, but there's some real things to be scared about. And sexual violence is one of them, in the sense that it's a true circumstance. And what I'm amazed about is that often, even as the work that I do, that is often generational. Like this person was molested or raped, and this person was molested and raped, and grandma, sister, blah blah blah. Even the fact that I have in my, on my dad's side, there were 12 brothers, and I've had people more than once ask me, did any of your uncles mess with you? Because it was so common in their families. Or like, there's no way you got 12, like you said, the depiction of black men, 12 black men, ain't nobody tried to touch you. And I'm like, first of all, I think they would all been killed. But, you know, I'm like, no, it's just something that people don't often talk about. And then when we talk about it, sometimes it comes up in a way that's not, that it does not, is not creating the right kind of discussion. And that R. Kelly thing just bothers me so bad that we still have to defend, or people are still blaming the girls. Yes, the parents have responsibility, but we're talking about, I think when people throw in what about the parents and what about the girls, they should have known better, it's like people who want to throw in everybody when you're talking about Black Lives Matter. Like don't divert from this focus. This focus is, as a man, an adult, he took advantage of all these girls, some of which was just straight up rape, and others were just, you know, sexual assault or manipulation of another word, you know, another term for sexual battery, or just really devious things. And he had a whole support system. So one thing we can do in stopping sexual violence is dismantle that rape culture in our head and check our own thoughts at the door when it comes to doubting victims. It's not our job, unless you're in prosecution and investigation, to doubt people, especially if they're coming to you. I'm not talking about pontificating about cases on television and whatever, but if your child comes to you, if your sister comes to you, if your brother comes to you, believe them, support them, ask them, what can I do? Especially if they're not children, they're adults, and then encourage them to get help. And you have people who are available, like people here at Refuge House. And I got permission from Michaela to, I'm going to put the Refuge House information up here, but also if you are in the Jefferson County or Madison County area, I encourage you to email Michaela. She's so full of information. She looks like a baby, but she's a grown woman. That's her email address. Also, if you're in the Jefferson, Madison County in North Florida, feel free to email me as well. This number down here, this hotline, if you call it and in need to speak to us, they will be able to connect that call. And if you are outside of this area, then I definitely encourage you to call this national number, this national assault number, and they can like connect you to other coalitions and domestic violence centers and sexual violence centers, because we care about you and we want to do our part to stop sexual violence. I'm going to let my guest give us the last word. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you for commenting below. And even if you're watching this on replay and not live, please make comments, ask questions in the section below. Tell me if you think I need to do a part 2. Next week, we're probably going to be dealing with domestic violence. And a lot of times these issues of sexual violence and dating violence and stalking and harassment and sexual violence, they weave in and out of each other. But I'm so grateful that I have Michaela with me today. Michaela, any last words you want to give to my hopeMORE family?
Yeah, so I have just 2 things that I want to end with.
Okay.
The first one, with you talking about like how to kind of like stop sexual violence or just be an advocate in your own way, and just doing whatever you can to add to just trying to stop it. Specifically with people like R. Kelly, who are musicians, or people who are actors or producers, like you mentioned, like don't listen to their music, don't watch their videos, their movies, because like people don't think about it. Like with R. Kelly, he has over 5 million streams on Spotify every month.
Wow.
And he gets paid per stream. So just by playing his music on your phone, you're putting money into his pocket. So that's just something to think about, and to just realize like you don't need money, you don't need to have this very powerful job to be able to speak out for survivors and victims. You can help in your own way, whether it's not listening to a song or being there for your friend after they've been assaulted. And the last thing I want to say is most counties have some sort of domestic violence and sexual violence center for their community. And so you can just do a Google search like sexual assault response teams, like near me, or domestic violence resources, just different community resources on the internet. And most of the time, there will be a number you can call or an email that you can write to, or something like that. So I would just say to make yourself aware of the resources and services that are in your community. Because even though you may not ever need it, someone you know will probably need it. So.
I love that. Michaela, thank you so much. Thank you all for watching. Michaela, hang on while I say goodbye. We thank you so much for watching. This is a special extended hopeMORE show. And I've already gotten word from one other person is like, yes, we need a part 2. And so let us know if you want us to do a part 2, if you're willing to come on. What things do you think we should cover that we haven't covered as it relates to sexual violence? Let us know. I'm saying let us know. See, Michaela, I've already drawn you in. Let me know. And we'll try to address it, because we realize this is a big problem that can't be resolved in a conversation. And I've learned a lot tonight, and I'm very impressed with Michaela. I'm like, come down to Taylor County. But thank you all so much, and have a wonderful Wednesday. Bye-bye.